So, beginning our journey with Spritesheets, one way we can do it is we can download one. And on OpenGameArt here, I found this nice sprite sheet of a wolf, and I'm going to use that. Now we'll notice that this has the wolf going up, down, right, left, howling, a bunch of different poses. Right now we're going to trim it up and only use one pose. So I've downloaded it and opened it in Photoshop. And now when I look at this, we can see it's relatively small as we look at it. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so we can see what is happening. Now when I look at this and I see, I'm going to just use my marquee tool and select around one wolf. And we can see that one wolf frame is 64 pixels by 32 pixels. So what I want to do is I want to capture frames that are all of the same size. So where the wolf howls, the frame gets taller. So we don't want to use that. We're going to just capture these movement frames of the wolf moving left. Now, it would be possible that we could use the entire sprite sheet and use JSON to store the data for all of the frames and grab all that information and do that. But that's not what we're after on this project. We just want to keep it simple right now. So if I know that one frame is 64 by 32 pixels, so it's twice as wide as it is tall, if I want to capture these bottom three rows, I'm just going to make a selection. And as I make the selection, I am going to work on making it so it should be 3 tall, that's 96, and then as we try and get our 64 pixels across times 5, that gives us 320 by 96. So now I've selected those frames. Now I can just simply copy that, choose File New in Photoshop. And when I choose to make a new file, I'm going to use what's on the clipboard. All right, looks like I didn't quite get it. It tells me I'm at 95, not 96 pixels. So let's try again. Or even better, we'll just go for a fixed size. And my width will be 320. And my height will be 96. Now the advantage of that is I can just simply click. And we'll see that it puts it on screen. Now File New, 320 by 96 pixels, perfect. And I will choose Create, Resolution. Should be at 72. Now let's paste that in. We can see, wow, that's really small. So I can zoom in and see, yep, there it is. There's the whole thing. Now, as I'm going to work with this, what I can do is I can resize this. So I went up 300% to make that a little bit bigger, so it's going to be a little nicer in my project. Now, if I go under Image Size, I can scale it up here. And by default, if we leave Automatic turned on when we scale it up, and now if I make my width 960, you can see it scales it up. And now when I do that, it looks like crap. It got all junky, fuzzy on the edges, so we don't like that. So what I can do instead when I choose image size is I can change it so that I use nearest neighbor as my algorithm for resizing. Now, when I choose 960, we'll see it maintained that aliased edge. It didn't anti-alias it and try and soften it. Now we could also perform a similar operation inside of Piskel. If we were doing it, we could bring the sprite sheet in, work with it, and scale it up. So what I'm going to do now is do a quick export. So a quick export as PNG, and we'll just call this wolf left. And there it is. Now if I go over to Piskel, if I choose import, I can even bring this image in. I'll choose the left one. open. And what's really cool is it recognizes that, hey, this could be a sprite sheet. I'm like, heck yeah, let's bring it in as a sprite sheet. And now that we have scaled it up by mentally, I'm kind of drawing a blank on my size here. Because 64 if we do that, but we multiply it by 3, so 92 gives me my height there, and oh no, not 72, 96 there. So now we can see it's dividing it all up, recognizing that we have individual frames. And when I do that, it'll replace what's there. Well, there's nothing there. I just have a blank document. So of course I want to replace it. All right. And now we can see this is what it looks like with the wolf. It's kind of walking, because these aren't really, each line is its own animation. So if I were setting this up in a game, it's a walk, it's a run, and it's kind of the stop and bite action. But for this assignment, I'm just going to let those go. So we can see this is what we will want our animation to look like when we are working inside the canvas. But notice I'm at 12 frames per second. So what I may end up needing to do is, if I'm going to just have one time control on my project, if I speed this up to 24 frames per second, we can see, well, that looks a little bit silly. So we might want to build a second version of this where we slow it down. And one of the ways we can do that is we can just simply duplicate each frame in the animation. So there's only 15 frames. Now if I go to a frame here on frame 15, and if I just click duplicate this frame, go to frame 14, duplicate, frame 13, duplicate, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and finally 1. Now we can see at 12 frames per second it's kind of crawling, but when we're at 24 we're back to what we saw. So we have a little more flexibility by adding in those additional frames. Now we need to get this out of here, and we've resized it in Photoshop, but I could have resized it here by entering in the numbers that I wanted, and that would scale it up. And when I export it, I would also have an option. I could have scaled it up as well to make it bigger. Now, previously we've exported as a series of individual image files or graphics. Now, if I choose PNG, I can see where I'm getting a series of columns and rows, and I can kind of choose how I want to do that as part of it. Now, as we're working with this, probably don't need, I already have it scaled up, so we'll just go with the default size. Now it's 4 rows and 8 columns to fit all of our frames in there. It gives all of our images that we're working with. Now, if I go to download this, that's my 30 frames. I can just download it as a PNG. It's going to prompt me, so let me just put it into that folder. Wolf left slow. And now I'm going to just make one bigger just because. Slow, big. So if we go into our folder, I will see that here is the original wolf. Now we've doubled the frames, and then now we've doubled it again and made it much larger, so we can see that the pixel dimensions are changing on it. And this is grabbing, so we've just grabbed that series of frames. So we can experiment with this and we can try it. We can put it in our project. We'll just use left, then we can use the slow and then the slow big, and just see how this works when we start building our animation. So this is one way that we can get our frames out of here. Another option is if we build our project inside Piskel, following along with previous tutorials. So we can see I have different layers: the head, the body, tail, legs, as part of the unicorn here. And we can see there is the unicorn moving along at 24 frames per second pretty comfortably. It's pretty small. So we can see if I put it at 6x, that starts to become a little better size. So I'm thinking I probably do want to scale this up, and I can scale it up and just resize it, but I can also, when I export this as a PNG, I can see now it makes each frame 64 by 64 if I want a small unicorn. If I want to go a bigger one, I could go up at 3x, 4x, 128. So I'll just go up 3x and make it 96. We can see that's going to be 10 frames. There's my size for this document. So notice these are fairly small things when I only have 10 frames. If I have more frames, it becomes more of an issue as we work through this. So now I can save out my unicorn here as a sprite sheet. And that's really all it takes to get the file out of Piskel, so it allows me to work with it that way. Now we're going to look at the situation where if you had individual frame images that you are already working with. So I exported out the unicorn as a zip to get the individual frames. So it's not the sprite sheet like we see here. So we can see we have our different wolf. Here's our unicorn sprite sheet. So we're accumulating a pretty nice collection of sprite sheets that we're going to be able to work with here. But let's say I had individual image files, whether I made those out of Photoshop or After Effects. A tool to put it into a sprite sheet that works really easy is the free Sprite Packer from Code and Web. This is the free version, an online free version of Texture Packer, which is a super awesome tool for building sprite sheets and texture atlases. So I'm going to just clear out what was there with the default, and now I can add sprites. I'm going to click on my folder, select the sprites I wish to import, and click OK. And we can see it's now building it. Now this time it's deciding to give me a slightly different arrangement. Now that arrangement, as we have it here, is probably not going to be ideal because we're basing what we're doing on columns. So we need to have a full group of columns. So when I look here, it's problematic because as these are arranged, I now have an empty frame here. So would have an issue with that. Now, what I can do is I could just simply do it as a horizontal group because it's not too big, and I can put that in, or I could go for a vertical group like this. So the good part is it's not too big. Now, if my frames were really big and I had a lot of frames, I have to watch that I don't exceed the maximum sprite sheet size, which is going to be 4056 by 4056 pixels, either tall or wide. So we have to be careful with that. I'm not exceeding that here, so we're in good shape. So I'm just going to choose horizontal because I feel like it right now. And then I click on PNG and it downloads my sprite sheet. And with that downloaded, here it is. Now I'm going to rename that. Just so it's different than the previous one, but we can see it is going to be the same. Now, what we will need to know is how many columns wide our sprite sheets are when we start getting to the point of working on the JavaScript code. So working in After Effects, I've created this smoke animation. Now, if I want to get this out of here, I will render it out as a series of PNG frames, and then I can use the Sprite Packer to assemble it into a sprite sheet. I mean, I suppose I could also use Piskel, but we're going to have a few more frames. So right now I have a 4-second animation. So if we look at our composition settings, we will see that it's 24 frames per second, and it is going to be, no, that's not the one I want. Comp 2 is the one I want here. This composition, so I've modified it down to 12 frames per second and modified the size 200 by 600. So I cropped the area because I know I don't need the full width of it. So the 800 by 600, that was the size of my canvas that we've been using in JavaScript. Now, cropping this down 200 by 600, so we can see that's the size it will make. 12 frames per second, so it cuts it down 4. So that gives me 48 frames that I am going to be working with. Now, comp 2 then is the one I want to export. So to get it out of here, I will add it to the render queue. Not using Adobe Media Encoder, the render queue is going to give me the PNGs fastest and easiest. Now, I'm going to click on lossless, and that's going to be the output module we're using. Instead of using QuickTime, I will choose PNG sequence. Then I need to change my colors to RGB plus alpha so it can be transparent. If I've built my animation too big and want to scale it down, I could certainly do that right here. So if I do the math on my frames, right now it's 48 frames. And I can fit that into the 4056 square sprite sheet maximum. But if I was at 24 frames per second, that would be problematic. It wouldn't fit, so I would have to scale it down because I would be generating more frames with it. So with that, I could click on resize and enter in the new size that I want it to be. And we can see I can also choose video sizes. We don't want that because we're not using a video size. So we're changing the percent here. I'm going to just leave it as is for now, and we'll see how it works. Now, when we play it back in our JavaScript, it is going to play faster because I'm only exporting half the frames, but I can live with that for now. So I'll say OK, and then I need to decide where I'm going to save it. And I'm going to save it into the Sprite Stuff folder, and I'm going to put it in a subfolder, and I'll just call this Smoke. And we'll save it again as PNGs. And I'm going to rename this Pink Smoke. And the brackets with the number signs indicate how it's going to number each frame as it exports it. So this tells me that I could have 5 numbers. So it'll be 0, 0, 0, 0, 0 in the beginning, then 4 zeros and a 1, etc. Or I could cut that down because I know I only have 48 frames, so I really only need 2 number signs, but we can just leave it. The zeros won't hurt anything. Now I can hit OK. And when I'm ready, I hit render, and we can see it smokes through that. Bad joke. Pretty quickly. And with my window up here, I'll click on smoke and see there is each frame of my smoke. There's my 48 frames that I have. We start counting at 0 through 47. All right. so now we got some frames. And if I want to assemble these, we can go here and hit clear, add sprites. Now let's not grab from the unicorn, let's grab from the smoke. Click on the first one, select all, hit open, wait for it. We don't want to do horizontal, we want to do compact this time. So it fits, can wait for it. All right, there it is, there's our pink smoke. And we can download that sprite sheet. And now that's been downloaded, I'll just simply rename it. So we've looked at how we can use After Effects, use Photoshop, use Piskel, use Sprite Packer, all of these different ways to generate our sprite sheets. So that's the important part that we are working on, is getting those sprite sheets ready so then we can start animating them on the canvas.